Welcome everyone to Next Level Leadership. I'm your host, Dana Weaver, and today we are talking with Loree Bell, who is the spice speaker, life clarity coach, and sales enablement trainer. Welcome, Loree. Am I saying your name right, Loree?
You are. Thanks, Dana. I am thrilled to be here. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
I'm so glad to have you. We're all glad to have you. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and about your leadership.
Happy to do so. So I have been working in the corporate sector over 20 years, and I started out in human resources and wanted to, my primary goal at the time was just to help people, right? I think that's why initially it seems very glamorous to go into HR because you can help people, right? And I'm naturally somebody who would be at the grocery store in line and someone comes up and asks me questions or tells me their life story. And so I felt like, well, maybe I have sort of a talent and gift in this area. Right. And I quickly found myself in a leadership role. Want to just like throw yourself in the deep end and start swimming. And I learned a lot along the way. But what I learned is I really do love coaching. I really do love seeing people take that next step in their career, in their personal life. And again, one thing that I can kind of point them in that direction, take with them where they need to go. So I went through human resources for about 10 years, and then I wanted to make a shift. And I remember sitting in my office one day thinking to myself, I need something different. And a VP of sales came into my office and said, Loree, we're opening up some positions in training and development in sales. I want you to apply and come work for me. It was the same day. So I knew this was like, planets aligning, if you will. And I said, great. And so over the last 13, 14 years, I've been working in sales enablement, really coaching leaders around how to effectively manage teams, as well as doing some sales training as well. So that's been a lot of the body of work. But again, I made this shift this year to really kind of go out on my own and to build a life clarity coaching business. So that's where I'm at today. But it's really my love of people and helping them, get to the next place that really kind of drives me on a regular basis. So
that's fantastic. And you're very engaging. You just attract people just by just being you and talking.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So, from Weaver Solution, that's the company that I own and run, we believe that everyone's unique. And I think that translates into leadership as well. And you really can't find two people who show up exactly like as leaders. I don't know that I can point to anyone. And I just was curious what your philosophy on leadership is and what guides your leadership.
Yes. I think that's a great question. I think that, when you at a point where a lot of companies sometimes I see this trend where, the highest performer becomes the leader and that's the one they promote because they're doing a really great job at their job. The company and organization doesn't necessarily give them the skills to, again, develop as a leader. So I think that's where that starts. It's like, well, we have a program, but we don't have funding yet. So just start managing people and keep your fingers crossed, right? And that's one approach. Yet what I've happened over the years is it's really around emotional intelligence. Have you heard of emotional intelligence at all, Dina?
I have. I've heard a lot about it.
Okay, great. So for our viewers that don't know, Daniel Goleman was one of the main sort of leaders around emotional intelligence for a number of years. And so there's 5 components that really sort of guiding principles around this. And so what I have found been successful is really around, the empathy. So there's self-awareness, there's empathy, there's some motivation, self-regulation, and some social skills. But what I found in working with leaders is that they really need to develop conscious listening and empathy. And I think for the next generation, we're changing the workforce so much right now. People are demanding and wanting different things than they have ever before, right? Like I think about my own journey in corporate America where we had the pandemic, we worked from home, we were finally able to blend and balance our personal and professional lives. Me as a single mom was no longer running to the train, dropping my kids off at 6 a.m. and then leaving work at 4 p.m., then home on a train to pick up my kids, right? There was a little bit more balance. And so I think that set new expectations on what leaders do to support their employees as well, right? It was one of those. I think we started realizing that we really had to be more in tune with who we worked with, especially when it was a screen like you and I have. We were no longer face-to-face in an office where we could really pick up on nonverbal communication and how are you feeling. It was really a different way of relating to somebody. And so I think for the next generation, and me particularly, it was really sitting in and listening to, looking into your eyes deeply, on a screen and really kind of understanding that person, asking more questions, getting more curious about that person and kind of what their struggles were. And if you think about, I think more than ever, I think it's around right now, the statistic, I think from Harvard Business Review is around 60% of people, 50 to 60% of people quit their manager. And they really feel like now in this work environment, even if you're day to day in an office or wherever you work, or if it's a hybrid or whatnot, your manager really represents the company that you work for, right? Like they are the salesperson, if you will, a window into that world. And so if you are not resonating with your employees and leading them down a path that they feel comfortable and they really resonate with you, they're going to leave, right? Even in right now where I think the work environment's a little bit more volatile and people are getting laid off, I think we've all realized how important it was to have these qualities. So for me, it's that empathy that really is going to kind of shift, I think, the work environment in the next couple of years.
I agree. I read, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I read a study recently that companies who focus on empathy and lead from empathy actually have better outcomes, a better bottom line, and their employees. And so where their customers, obviously. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I think it's shifting from, this masculine-led, I don't know, philosophy, if you will, where it's all about execution and deliverables and the revenue and bottom line. Well, that is important. But there is a consciousness shift going on, I think, worldwide. So it's going to continue to evolve. And I think that people are now realizing, I think with the pandemic and these companies saying you need to come back to work and employees saying, no, we're not going to. They realized, I think the collective realized how much power they actually had around influencing leaders' decisions. And I mean, I'm coming from the tech world in Seattle where they are demanding people to come back to work and the employees are just like, no, this is really important to us. And the companies that actually listen and are more self-aware are the ones that, you're right, are going to be successful long-term. Those other ones are going to die out. Either you transform and evolve or you will not be successful is how I'm feeling, right? So there is this very big push, I think, around this is what's important and we have to have a balance.
Absolutely. I think you're hitting on something that not enough of us are paying attention to right now. And that's that the workforce expectations are changing. And those companies that aren't keeping up are going to go away, or they're going to have to reach. And so what do you see in the next 10 years happening to companies, or how do you see them evolving to meet the employees' expectations?
Again, I think we're going to have to go back and take a step back and say, are we approaching our work holistically? You're going to have AI that's coming in here as well right now. And I think there's a lot of people that are scared that they're not going to have a job. So I think it's also redefining not just at the company level, but us in that self-awareness. There's a self-regulation and awareness that happens on the emotional intelligence scale. What's important to me? How am I showing up? I think if you're going to be more authentic in how you come across, the better, right? You've got to be able to, and there's always been these discussions with leadership around being transparent. But I really think it's moving from, again, this like hierarchy of, organizational development to more of a flat organization where everyone is more collaborative and has a little bit more approach around the conversation and how companies are run. I could even see a lot of that kind of falling away where you don't have that traditional like organizational model where there's a CEO at the top and then you have the direct reports and you know how that goes sometimes in organizations. I really see that kind of falling away. I would love to see where there's a lot more collaboration around making group decisions. Right. Yeah. Still, you still have someone maybe potentially leading that. But I think if we can also lean from, again, getting down to like, what motivates you? Taking the time to really have those conversations. What does your customer actually want? Are we shifting from, again, sort of this capitalistic model where it's about revenue? Like, what do we really want? I think you're going to see that shift too. But it starts, a lot of times with the leaders at the top. Do they have enough courage to say, how am I showing up today? Like, am I thinking boldly enough? Am I really being inclusive enough? There's a huge push around inclusivity right now, too. So it's really kind of be having more conscious awareness around how you're showing up in your work and not just going through the task.
That is very well said. I couldn't have said that better myself. This idea of, it's not an idea, it's a movement and it's long overdue, but being more inclusive as an employer and being more inclusive as a leader. How can people build their leadership acumen around being inclusive from your perspective?
I think that first it starts with just building the relationships. I think that it sounds, I want to give you some fancy answer, but it really, I think, goes back to the fundamentals around doing a self-internal check, again, on that self-awareness to say, do I know my employee? Especially now when you have global teams, sometimes if you're thinking from like a corporate sector, if not, even if you have employees in an office or wherever your work environment is, do you really understand who you're working with? Right? I think that's where you've got to start. Do you, not to say you have to be best friends with your employee, that's not what I'm saying, but you need to understand what is their motivation, right? Like, what does that look like for them? I think about, when people get upset, I worked in HR for a really long time. And one of the top concerns people would come to me with is my manager's not listening to me. The manager's not flexible, right? So again, it goes back to, have you taken the time? I know we're busy working, but that's that shift. I think that's that shift that has to happen to be inclusive. Are we including the collective voice in the decision-making process? Or is it really just coming from the next top level down in terms of what that decision is, right? So I think it's really just, again, taking the time to start having those collaborative conversations with your teams or your coworkers or your peers, or you and I are having a conversation, right? It's just like really kind of getting down to the humanness of who we are.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I agree on.
Yeah.
Would you say that you have had role models in your past that were great leaders that have shaped your leadership journey?
Yes, 100%. Yes. One that comes to mind, I tend to find that if I'm kind of reflecting back, I tend to have had a lot of men leaders in my time. And I think what's been successful for me is exactly what we've talked about, where they are open to new ideas, right? There is that conversation. It really is a people manager type conversation as opposed to anything else. I'm thinking about a time where we had to go through this like pretty extensive training program in a really short amount of time. And I went to my manager and said, I don't even think this is realistic. I don't even think that we are going to be able to train hundreds of people in the timeline that this person wants to train. What do we do? Right? And what I love about it is that they had enough courage to go to their VP and say, we need to really think this timeline and say, this is not realistic. Do we want to put out just something that's a knee-jerk reaction in a program? Or do we want to have a quality training and really actually develop our employees? And sometimes that's uncommon because you have so much pressure from the top a lot of the times in some of these conversations that I really appreciated him kind of going to bat for our team and saying, and even if the decision had been, no, we still need to implement this in 60 days, at least I know the conversation happened, which from an employee standpoint goes a lot further than just the no, get back and execute and do your task, right? So I think leading that and really being able to have the courage again to go and say, hey, let's talk about this. Sometimes it gets a better result. And so what happened in this case is that the VP that he went to said, you're right. And then it was it wasn't even like it was really something they thought through. Sometimes leaders are making larger decisions. They don't understand the implications for the people who actually have to implement things, right? So it's just raising your hand and saying, hey, have we really thought this through? Let's zoom out, look at this big picture. And is this really what's right for the organization sometimes or where you're working? And a lot of times it's like, no, you're right. I haven't really thought about that. But sometimes there can be some hesitancy from people around, speaking up. And so I think what's going to have to happen is we're all going to have to find that courage and be authentic and just say, hey, let's think about this a little bit more. Is this the right decision?
Well, I'm glad that you had a leader who actually did that. There's not a lot of people who do that these days. And yes, frankly, they're not trained to do that. They're not. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, they're not trained to do that. When you become a leader, if you don't have the training, or even a manager, not just managers are very, very important, or supervisor, if you don't have the training, the first thing that we all do is we default to who was our last manager, who was a manager.
Right.
And if they had a bad experience, they might take on some of those traits, or they might try to go completely opposite of that. And so I'm a big proponent of the training early and often, because that really set an organization apart, because it gives them the tools. And then you can go into some of these soft skills, like you're talking about with courage. Courage is so important. So I'm really thrilled that you brought that up. And I think our viewers are it will make them take a step back a little bit and think about how is their courage showing up in their leadership.
Well, that's what I was just going to say, Dan. You have such a good point, because I think that in those cases where, if you have a new leader that's coming on board, most of your employees are going to recognize they're new, right? But it's up to the employees to, you're right, say, hey, let's talk about this, and start having those conversations so that the manager can shift and grow, right? Because you're right, a lot of companies but have the time, resources, or whatnot when they promote people. And so it's really then, can we all come together to kind of like, okay, here's the goal, right? Here's our goal, or what we're looking for. Let's all work towards that. But it does take the village, to me, right? Because again, we all have to be kind of working with each other. And even if there's one person, usually there's employees that are talking about it. Okay, this isn't working. Even if there's one person that can go to the manager and say, hey, we all talking as a collective, if that's the environment. It really depends on the culture of the company too. But I'm hoping that, I feel like if there's good intentions from the leader or the manager to do a good job and lead in an authentic way, I feel like they would be open to the conversation, right? It just takes that one person to kind of start that shift, I think, sometimes. So excellent point around the courage piece.
Yeah, I totally agree. So because this person influenced you, and it was something that you admired, and that, how has your courage changed, and how do you show up differently as a leader because of that knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was around the time back in 2017 when I had this leader, and I had been working for him he had just started, and I wanted to take this trip, the solo travel trip. In Spain. I was walking a couple 100 miles across Spain by myself on what's called the Camino de Santiago trail. And so it's a pilgrimage trail. Some people do it for adventure. Some people do it for spiritual reasons. But it's been around for 1,000 years. And it's really a transformational experience. And so he just started, and I said, you know what? I need to take a month off. I'm like, I know that's a lot of time. This is an exception, but this is really important to what I'm doing. He said, you know what? We can tell this is what you need to do. Go for it. And he gave me a month off. And during that period of time when you're walking, you really don't. You're with you, right? You are really thinking and reflecting, and you meet other people along the way. And there's one woman that I was walking with for a couple days, and she had this really large backpack. It was really heavy. It's like a 40 liter. She had packed literally anything in there that could go wrong. She had all these things in there, right? She was struggling, and one day she started crying, and she stopped. She said, I can't carry this anymore. And I said, okay. And I'm just kind of sitting there holding space for her, and she starts crying, and she says, you know what, Loree? And I said, what? She said, why am I carrying all these burdens? It's really like life. Like, why can't I just take this backpack off and take things out and lighten the load? Why am I carrying this all around? And I said to her, you're right. I don't know. Why are you carrying all these around? What am I carrying around? And we really stopped to reflect on, like, okay, what can we let go? Why are we want to be these perfect people out there looking perfect with every solution, every answer when something popped up, and that's not life. That's not how things go. And so when I came back from that, I really started thinking about, like, what am I carrying around at work? And, at the time, this leader as well was sort of along the same philosophies. And so how it shifted me is I started thinking, okay, so what can I delegate off? What pressure am I putting on myself to be this perfect leader? Leadership isn't just about somebody who you're reporting into, like a CEO level or C-suite. You can lead in an organization at any level. And I think that's what you realize, right? It doesn't have to be director, a VP, or a manager. You can lead any way you like. And so that's what really started that. I started doing a mentor program with him, and we really started, again, developing people that don't necessarily even want to be leaders and be promoted, because I think that's always the assumption that you want to be promoted.
Yeah.
Need to be promoted. I mean, there's people that are perfectly happy being individual contributors and just leading in a group. And that's what we started. We started working on just like leaders who wanted to lead and kind of changing and shifting on what that looked like. And that really was a really critical time because, again, I kind of understood like where my place was too. I wanted to influence other leaders, but I just always want to lead in group, right? Like I have direct reports, right? So that's kind of where I shifted a little bit to say, hey, I think I could do more work educating and leading people along that path right now where I'm at. And it really kind of took like him kind of coming in at the same time that I started walking this trail, and they all kind of came together at the same time to kind of shift things. So it was really, really important in terms of like how I developed during maturity time.
That's amazing. I love that story. And I love how it influenced you when you came back. I want to take just a moment to pause on the imagery of that woman walking along the path with you and just crying because she had this backpack. Yeah. And that touched me because I know I've been one who has carried too much in my backpack before and didn't delegate and didn't take things out. And I think that there's going to be a lot of viewers that has happened to as well. So just breathe into that for a moment and know that you can start.
That's exactly it. I think that I think with women in particular, I've learned that we feel like we have to be these perfect beings at all times. We have these such unrealistic expectations of who we are as people. We have to be the perfect mom, the perfect partner, perfect employee, the perfect manager, whatever that looks like. And it becomes like, where does that come from? And where can we kind of peel back that layer for ourselves to say, like you're saying, like I realized I had to feel like I need to do everything myself. I'm a single parent. My ex lives out of state. I am the only parent 75% of the year. And so I was trying to measure up and meet these high expectations that I was only putting on me. The other thing I learned in this too is that when you go through this walk and you're walking and you're really just focused on like eat, sleep, walk, repeat every day, and you get into this space of really reflecting, and then you realize when you climb these mountains and you get to where you need to get at the end, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. And I think that's what the next generation really needs to understand. Like, you don't have to prove anything to anyone, not even yourself. Just be you. And when you get yourself in situations where they're hiring or hard, take one step at a time and listen to who you are. And I think if we can get more into that, again, heart-centered leadership as well. I think you'll see that shift too as people become more in touch with who they are. I think that'll be really important as well as we kind of move down this path and evolve as people in workplaces. People want to be happy. They're going to shift and realize that it's not just about work. And we've already realized that, right? So I think when I realized I had nothing to prove anymore, that becomes so like empowering for you or even for me. I was just like, wow, okay, what does this mean? I can just show up as who I am. I don't have to be someone else. And that in itself looks things out of that backpack, right? Like really starts unpacking like, oh, okay, I can just be me and that's it, right? And that's good enough. And so those are really important to kind of think about too, is like what that is for yourself. So
yeah. I wish all of us could take a pilgrimage like that.
You can. It doesn't. Even if it's, I think that's what's in Dana, right? Like it doesn't have to be something glamorous if that's what you think of it as. It could be, again, taking 10 minutes, 15 minutes out of your day. Like start with getting quiet with yourself for 10 minutes. If that's all that your schedule allows, and start building it that way, again, one step at a time. If your resources can't get you to a place where you can do like a longer pilgrimage, think of it, try to shift your perspective to say, okay, what can I do during the day or what I have with me right now, whatever resource I have with me, right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm writing down so that I don't forget that. So let's talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence. That's something that you brought up early, and it's something that is kind of central to what you do in your coaching. And you have a class called 3 Keys to Using Emotional Intelligence and the Power of You to Influence the Next Generation of Leadership. So tell us a little bit more about how you work with emotional intelligence people that you.
I'll have a Pathfinder program, and then we because in discovery sessions, we kind of go through a master class, and I go through like, here's, there's 5 pillars in the master class. We're going to cover 3, the top 3. So for me, those are going to be self-awareness is kind of where that starts, right? And kind of getting quiet with who you are. Empathy, because I do feel like, we all have that empathy, but I think sometimes there's some confusion on what empathy is. Empathy versus sympathy, and kind of talking through some of those things. And then your social skills. I think as we move through this digital age, you're going to have to really refine your social skills and your ability to relate to other people. I know that sounds funny to some, but really, I really think that we've become a little bit desensitized to each other, particularly with this Zoom age where a lot of us are on screens and calls. So I think it's working with those 3 pillars within the Pathfinder program to really get to what your life purpose is, right? It's kind of working with you to get, okay, let's peel back those layers. Let's get you self-aware. Let's get you quiet. So again, when you're saying, wow, I don't have the resources right now to do a pilgrimage, well, we can work together where we do carve out time for you every, twice a month or whatever that looks like for you to really do that work. You can think of it that way, right? That is your sacred time to that work for you, right? So I think that's where you can kind of, again, get in tune with yourself to say, am I authentically showing up? Am I thinking big enough for me? How do I have time to do that? Right. And kind of clearing out some of those blocks and things that are in your way, right? That's part of being a coach is identifying and figuring out for that client, how can we help you move forward? Again, if it's a baby step, that's wonderful. If it's a bigger step, that's great. Depends on what you're ready for. But if it's a step in the right direction that gets you where you need to be, that's the win. We're also hardwired to think about like, where we, as humans, like, okay, we're scanning our environment all the time for things that are unsafe or push us outside our comfort zone, right? And I think it's sometimes saying, okay, let me help you work through what is going right? And start reshifting how your brain works so that you can embrace and say, you know what, on the day where I feel crummy, I know I'm going to have a coaching session later and we're going to kind of shift that mindset, right? So it's a lot of mindset work in the program. I also do offer the tours on the Camino Santiago. So we'll have two tours on that next year. So that's doing walking and some coaching along the same time. So there's a 7 and 10 day. Yeah, we're going to do one in Spain and one in Portugal. So those are really exciting. So, if you choose to want to go down that path at some point, that's available as well. But it's really kind of just working with you and kind of tuning into who you are, right? And where you want to go. So
that's fantastic. But it's so important. I think at least the women of my generation, I'm Gen X and almost millennial. I think we've been taught to just kind of follow the path and do what we're told. I mean, that's what we were taught growing up. And we haven't taken enough time to do that self-discovery. So that is so important. I'm so glad that that's a major focus of what you talk about and what you do. And also that's a movement that's happening in our country right now, because it's 100% is ourselves.
Well, and I think it's very easy to follow the status quo because it's safe.
Yeah.
Right. But I know that my purpose and my work, and it always has been, is to push people outside their comfort zone. If they're willing and ready to go down there, you're like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm willing to go down that path because I'm visionary enough that I want, and I see where we need to head as a collective sometimes. And yeah, we may be taught that, but I'm always willing to kind of like, okay, let's push this boundary, test this boundary a little bit. Let's have the conversation at least and see what happens. What about the possibilities? What other possibilities are out there for you that you may not be aware of because you've never dipped a toe like in unknown water, right? So it's even taking that first tiny dip, working together step by step. Again, some people need a lot of structure. So it just depends on kind of like your personality and what you need in terms of like coaching. But you're right. I agree. I am also around similar age where my personality is more as a coach. This is what I'm here to do, right? Is to help people that want to go to that next step get there.
That's great. So I'm thinking about the seasoned executive who might be watching this, and they are entrenched in the way things have always been, and you want to keep it this way because it might disrupt their world. And they might not be thinking that necessarily, but that's kind of the way that they act, and it might start to become, more visible to you as you watch that. So, what would you say to that person who be a little bit interested, but still kind of wants to preserve the status quo.
I agree. I think that I worked for a number of individuals or worked with over the years. I think the first thing really is just having a conversation. I mean, I tend to find that if you have people that, and you being authentically you're going to attract people that are ready for that, I think, as energetically. Right? So if I think about, teaching a class and we may have, I don't know, 50 executives in that room, a handful are going to come up to me and say, hey, I love what you said. Let's have an additional conversation. It doesn't mean radical change has to happen overnight, right? It has to be sometimes a step-by-step process. It also depends on the culture of the organization. I mean, where you feel like you may make the most impact. Sometimes you've got to go look for other people like you that, again, start finding other people and advocates in your company that believe what you believe, right? That's how a lot of these things shift and change is that, okay, we have found in training programs where we're talking about emotional intelligence, that may be really groundbreaking for a lot of companies. Like, whoa, you want me to think about empathy and you want me to think about self-awareness? What are you talking about? Okay, let's take one piece of that then, one concept of that first, and integrate that and see how that feels. Like, go at a different pace. A lot of times, I think with training and coaching, you have to meet people where they're at, right? Organizations where they're at. So there may be a CEO that has a very conservative point of view, but there's always people in the organization I find that will be attracted to what you're talking about. So it's finding those like people, right? And so a lot of times in talking to executives, it's really more around, okay, what can you do? What is one thing then that you could do today that can make that shift in the organization? It may not change overnight. Sometimes culture shifts can take a year, 18 months to shift. Sometimes a little bit quicker depending on the company, right, and the size of the organization, but it doesn't mean you still can't do that work for yourself. It may mean that you actually do the work and then you exit the organization because that really ultimately wasn't where you needed to be.
Yeah.
And that's happened. I worked with people then at that level that have said, you know what, you're right. This no longer fits for me. I need to move on and find a different company with different values. And that's okay too. I mean, that's what they needed. Someone just to kind of be that sounding board and hold that space. And not give them like a long list of tasks that they have to do, right? Sometimes it's just about having the conversation. So,
absolutely. Well put. One of the things that really struck me in the title of some of your trainings, especially about the next generation, it's really near and dear to my heart in the field of aging services, because the vision of my company that I just created earlier this year is to empower the next generation of leaders to be change agents and disruptors in aging services. So what about this next generation of leaders that are starting to emerge excites you?
I think it is because we can show up as ourselves, right? I think the first question, if people take it, it's like, okay, we like what you're saying, but we're still not sure what we'd want to do. I think if there's one thing that you could take out of this really is to ask yourself this question. Am I showing up boldly enough in what I'm doing every day? Am I feeling good when I walk out the door? Are you showing up authentically, right? And if the answer is no, then you need to, again, take some time to really inspect and think about that. And what does that mean for you, right? So I think for me, I think the exciting part, and I think this is where I wanted to shift the work environment 10 years ago before COVID ever came along. I was the disruptor that was saying, I want a hybrid job. And people were like, what? And what I did? Is set my intentions around what I wanted, because I was working and I was in Seattle, but I had like a longer commute. And I only then sought out companies energetically that could support my work environment, right? So, and that's exactly what happened. So setting some intentions for what you do want, right? I think, and feeling that empowerment is what's going to shift. We've already seen that with people saying, well, we're not coming back to work. But I love this. I wanted this day, but then like, a long time ago. So I feel super excited about leading group and encouraging that sort of, again, disruption is where innovation happens. There's always going to be disruptors. It's just usually the disruptors are kind of in this room somewhere all together in the closet, and now they're all out. I feel like we've been all unleashed, and there's momentum going that isn't going to be stopped, right? So that's what is exciting, is we can all collaborate and come up with new ideas as our world shifts so much. It's moving so fast we can hardly keep up, right? So again, it's what the trick is going to be is keeping with that humanness with each other while we're disrupting, right? And kind of keeping ourselves grounded. And so I think there's enough people that, that are even in like new age movements or other like alternative healing movements and things all this is sort of happening at the same time. And I think that's exciting because this is a really, I think, exciting time in history to be doing that. And so the work environment definitely needs to come along with with the collective consciousness and change and shift in consciousness and stuff. So that's exciting. I feel because younger generations have a little bit more influence and they're understanding their influence and how they can impact that. Even one person these days on social media can make such a difference and impact. Where before, I think, earlier generations, they didn't have that technology and they couldn't reach on a global scale. They didn't understand that. Like, I'm one person, what can I do? And I definitely feel that has shifted and changed. So that's exciting for me to see that happening finally.
Yes, I agree. I've heard that a lot. One person really can make a change.
Yeah.
And a lot of us have tried to make a change. Before we really knew how the world was when we were young and just out of college or just entering the workforce, we didn't have that experience of being, hit down by whatever happens in corporate America. We thought we could change the world. And now I feel like we've said it enough times that we're really able to make that change and start to do that. So that is super exciting.
Yeah, I agree. And so it's still, again, and you see all these companies they're really shifting and saying, this is who I am, this is my identity. And they will attract, like energy is going to attract like energy, right? So you're going to find those people are going to be drawn to those type of organizations. Just like I set my intentions all those years ago. Guess what? I worked for companies where I could work a hybrid model. I was working hybrid way before it was acceptable because this is what I needed, right? This is what I needed for balance in my life. And now there's a whole generation of people that are doing this. So I love it. I love it when we can push the envelope.
I agree. I can't wait to see how employees in healthcare push the envelope because they obviously can't always work hybrid when you're caring for people, but there can be disruption there and what that will be. So
what do you think will happen with the disruption in healthcare? Just curious.
Well, things are already starting to happen, right? So there's lots of issues with workforce at all levels of healthcare, especially in my kind of niche or my world of aging services. It's been something that's been on the horizon for a really long time that it was going to get bad. And then once the pandemic hit and we had to live through that, it got even worse because people did start questioning, what is my passion? What is it that I'm supposed to do? And some people decided that they just didn't want to work in fields that didn't care about them anymore. And the way that we've been set up in healthcare is top down for the most part and not a lot of collaborative learning. There is that. And there are some really great companies that do that, but there's not enough of it going on. And so I think what's going to happen is a lot of those providers, if you will, of healthcare services that don't try to embrace some sort of a hybrid model or more flexible work environment than what we've been talking about over the last 10 years in our field.
Yeah.
I think that they're just going to be gone because it becomes how do you look at each person as an individual and what they need, and how can you create a job description that not only meets their needs as an individual, but helps them to grow and helps them to step up and lead if that's what they want to do. So I'm not entirely sure what that looks like, but I do look forward to seeing how that.
Do you think the patient needs around like what they expect from the healthcare providers is changing as well? I feel like I'm having conversations around, where we as a consumer have seen the shifts in healthcare, just like a breakdown in administrative process, or you really have to be an advocate right now for your own needs, or you kind of get lost in that system. I know from my own personal experience, there's also people that feel like they want to blend like Eastern alternative medicine with like Western medicine. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like what that might look like.
Well, I think that I don't know how much of that has entered into at least the aging services space.
Yeah.
I know that it's starting to enter into other healthcare spaces because more and more people are bringing it. More people that actually work in the fields are learning about these alternative medicines and want to bring them to their practice. And they're starting to do that, but they're doing it outside of the traditional medical model. They're making it kind of hybrid into how they serve their patients or whatever. As far as like, I'm thinking retirement communities right now, how can they live? And I think it's bringing in people who have knowledge around those medicines, and it's going to take the consumers asking the questions and having the expectations. I'm too young to be the consumer now, but it's going to happen, in a certain amount of years. And when I'm there, I want organic food, and that is not cost effective, right? Is that how are they percent? How are they going to make that happen? I'm surprised that more places haven't really started to think that, but it's all about cost effectiveness. So how are we going to make the needs of organic food cost effective? And I think like if you're in a rural community, so I'm from Kansas, and I know some nursing homes actually grow a lot of their own food, and the residents so cool aren't in that. Yeah, it's very. And so I know that can't always happen in a large city, but that's something that is starting to change. And it's what we demand as consumers that really makes a difference. And
that's it.
I think what it really boils down to is we are so entrenched in that medical model of doing everything the way it's always been that we can't figure out how to make efficiencies with new ideas like those and save money. It's all about saving money and being efficient and getting as much done as you can. And I feel like other industries have figured this out. Healthcare can certainly be, and some pockets of healthcare have, and we just need to look at that and follow that.
It'll be definitely be an interesting journey to see how that shows up, because you're right. As the people age in other generations, the demand is going to be different. That's exactly what's happening in the work environment in other industries, right? It's like, this may have been acceptable at one time, but it's not now.
Yeah.
You're right. So, right. As the consumer, if it really is just about economics, the consumer demand is going to have to shift at some point. It's just a matter of when.
And we've got a generation that's coming up that has a lot of money for the most part. I mean, it's a diverse thing. We've got some that have a lot of money, and we've got some that don't have very much money. But those with a lot of money are going to be able to throw that money out there and say, this is what I want.
That's right. And you already see those shifts in consumerism anyway, around certain products are no longer being made because millennial and other generations don't care. They have a different value system, right? So I think that's exciting to see that shift. And I think part of my job is to cultivate that, and to, again, for the people that are even younger or whatever generation you're in, it's really about shifting and being authentic for who you are and what you want, what you stand for.
Absolutely. So as we're wrapping up this conversation, which has been fantastic, by the way, what is something that I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked you that you would like?
Good question. I think for me, it's more around women. So I support women. And really kind of getting an understanding maybe from you, Dane, like, what have been your challenges? I'll ask you the question. Okay. What have been your challenges in your work environment that you wish would shift that can make, like, you're now on your own starting your business? Like, what was that motivation? Usually there's because there's something that you weren't getting in your environment that you wish you had, and now you're sort of taking control of your own destiny, if you will. So, or what have you seen that are challenges for women that, we need to coach on or address in the future?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that has been kind of percolating in my mind for at least 5 years is this whole notion of women supporting each other in a way that lifts us up and not seeing each other as competition.
Yeah.
And
on a perspective, yes.
Yes, honestly.
Yes, let's shout that. Yes, right? Like, that is it. Yes.
Yeah. Just holding each other up. I mean,
yes,
you and I met in a program where we hold each other up as women in a way that I have never experienced in my entire career. So I've never really...
That's why I went through the program, right? Because I was like, what is this?
Right. It's something very special that we want to bring forth out into the world. And I think one of the biggest things that women can do is start to support each other and not see each other as competition, but what could we do together to lift all boats? And competition is the old way of thinking of things, and being jealous of how someone shows up, or it feels like maybe they're being overshadowed or whatever. That's got to go away. And imagine what we could create or we could impact if we help each other up all the time. So that's something that I hope that in my business I'm able to convey as well, and lift up and put in and support women, because it's really, really, really important. We're kind of our own worst enemies. Sometimes we look at the men and say, well, the men, they created these workforces the way they are now, or their influence has created that. And yes, that's sort of true, but we can disrupt that, and we should have disrupted it along.
You're disruptors, Dana. You and I, we're doing this work. We're doing the good work for the warrior women. I know that's how I feel. I'm like, listen, ladies, it doesn't matter what your age, show up and do the work. And I feel like I've come from tech, where there's women in tech groups all the time, and you do band together because, for example, I could even, 10% usually of a workforce is women. I could train a class of 100 men, and there might be like literally 3 women, or just a very small amount. So you do tend to, again, but you're right. Sometimes there is a sort of underlying competition. And wouldn't that be wonderful if we can set intentions around what the world looks like when we really step into our power?
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. In healthcare, there's tons of women. Yeah, there's a lot of women. They may not all be at the top, which is where I think we should want to be more. But there are a lot of women, and maybe when there's more women, they compete more. I don't know, but we certainly can lift all birds. We've got the capacity for that. Look at all we should really for.
Yes.
So, tell us a little bit more, real quick, about how can people get a hold of you, and if they'd like to work with you or whatever. How can people get a hold?
For now, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm out there just under Loree Bell as well. And then we also have a Calendly. So if you want to book just a quick discovery session, a free 30-minute session, you can do that too. But those are my primary audience sometimes is on LinkedIn. So I'm using that as my platform. Instagram, I'm also out there as well. So those are the 2 platforms right now that I'm planning on.
Awesome. Well, we'll also put that in the notes, the comments, so that anybody can link to there and get to know you more. And some of the big ideas that I'm really taking from our conversation today that really have impacted me is this whole idea of we need to be more focused around empathy and being empathetic leader, and then taking our backpack off and making our load lighter because we deserve it, and that is so important. And then finally, this idea of holding women up. I know that kind of came up organically at the end, but definitely holding women up. And what are some of your takeaways from the conversation?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, it's really around brainstorming, even with the women that I think that right now, if you can see these things where there's single moms that are banding together to live together, it's thinking outside the box on how you can solve solutions for yourself. I think the other thing too, and thinking about how we were talking, is giving yourself permission that you don't have to do everything yourself or do it by yourself. Because I think there are so many, even people that may have children or wherever you're at in life, that you feel somewhat alone. You may have a network, but day in and day out, you don't feel like you always have that support. And I think that, again, that kind of goes back to your self-awareness and figuring out, what do you need? And giving yourself permission to have support flow in, I think is really, at any level, no matter what you're doing, I think is really important. I had to get to that place where I'm like, okay, Loree, you don't have to be perfect, number one, right? That's a big one. That's a big one for women, I think. We all want to be perfect. Because think about these impossible standards we have, Barbie, and that whole phenomenon there, right?
Yeah.
This is what you're supposed to be attaining, and that's not realistic. We all have our own gifts and talents, and honoring all of that, I think, is really important. So I think that, again, it's changing your mind shift. It's changing that shift in how you think about yourself and saying, no, I can lean on and trust other women to help lead, to help, when I can't do it, there is a group that can help support that. So I think that's really important. And there's more to come. I'm excited about this next generation and how they're going to lead. I love it.
Well, thank you very much for being part of this podcast today, or this YouTube channel. And thanks to everyone who spent time with us today. I'm sure that, like us, you have gained a lot of information or key takeaways that can actually change your leadership tomorrow. Just one step, one small step can make changes in your leadership. We would love to know what some of those are in the comments. So if you could put that below, that would be fantastic. And if you have questions, feel free to put those in there, and I'll be happy to answer them, and well, that Loree might as well. So if you find value in this interview, I know you did, or any of the interviews that we've done on Next Level Leadership, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and then share your favorite interviews and let more people know about it. So until next time, thank you, Loree, for being with us. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.